Hey, beautiful humans. Welcome to Think Out Loud with me, a chat cast produced, hosted, and humbly offered by yours truly, Natalie Peterson, from my little neck of the woods in Northern Colorado to you in yours, wherever and whenever that might be. This digital adventure is an effort to turn years of internal chatter, wondering, silent suffering, and physical and mental close calls into enlightening and empowering conversations with others. Given how many choices you have to spend your time, I consider it an honor that you're listening in. My mornings consist of a pretty consistent routine. 6 a.m. rise, coffee on, corner recliner by the window with my blanket and my iPad. I usually take a minute or two to defog my eyeballs and then see what the day has in store. This morning's inbox actually made me laugh out loud. The first 3 subject lines read, "Fall head over heels in love with yourself." The next one, "The key to finding your purpose." And then the third one, "This is exactly," all caps, "what you've been looking for. Click here." Click here. If only it was that easy, right? I mean, sure, there's stories out there of people who click to find and do find their true love or their perfect job or ultimate peace of mind, a dream come true of a life, via the leap they took by clicking a button. In my own journey, I've clicked a lot of buttons. Early in my sobriety and what I now know was a mental health crisis, I spent frantic days and nights poring over sites and books and headlines and videos and step-by-step instructions to reveal the secret, hear the click, illuminate the answer to my predicament of being stuck underwater, drowning in my suffering and struggles and confusion. Yeah, I needed help. I had spent my entire life avoiding dark places in my psyche, wounds, both self-inflicted and at the hands of others, thinking I could just stay one step ahead and save myself the trouble, the pain, the discomfort of facing the mess. One beautiful winter morning, I was lying in the sunshine on an adjustment table at my chiropractor's office. My neck was stretched over blocks to elongate and alleviate the tech neck and really severe lockjaw that I was battling when a realization washed over me. I need people. I need to talk. I need to connect. I need to get the hell out of my head, open my mouth, open my heart, get over this idea that I can do this alone. And then Think Out Loud with Me was born. And now I'm here. And the click I made a few minutes ago was to hit record so that my connection with another human with whom I share this planet and who I know has wisdom of their own to share can be shared with you. This is exactly where I was supposed to be today, here with Silen Wellington. Silen is a sculptor of sound, artist of people, gender liminal shapeshifter, mercurial name collector, restless poet, and storyteller, among other things. They found their way to wholeness and self-love through mostly alternative means, namely guided rites of passage journeys, performance art, unhinged, unfettered, unapologetic dance, and connections with fiercely humble elders and mentors who shared some of Silen's marginalized identities. Silen is endlessly grateful to have found their way to peer support work as the director and peer support group facilitator at Yarrow Collective, a nonprofit peer-run organization here in Northern Colorado, offering mental health support by and for people with lived experience of mental health and substance use struggles. With a team of other wonderful humans, they facilitate Yarrow's Alternatives to Suicide, Genderqueer Peers for transgender and non-binary folks, and ECHO teen groups. Silen, it means a lot to me to be able to think out loud with you today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me and for sharing some of that story. I resonated a lot with some of what I was identifying in your story as this being a seeker. And I was, as you were sharing, I was just remembering times in my life where I was picking up every book and just poring over pages and trying to find what was going to help me. So I resonate a lot with that impulse to keep seeking.
Yeah. I sat in a very meaningful session with you and your peer, Ashley, at Founded in FOCO back in early March, and I was immediately drawn to your story, your energy, your humanness. Can you share a bit about your journey to this point in time and the circumstances that led you to develop Yarrow Collective?
Yeah, so I always struggle with where to start in this story because a lot of what ended up helping me and my own mental health struggles was not being called peer support, but I realized in hindsight perhaps could have been called that. And I didn't learn what peer support was until basically like I was helping to birth Yarrow Collective with about half a dozen other folks in conversations that were leading to an organization or this organism being created. And a little of my story, I grew up in northern Colorado in so-called Fort Collins, Colorado. And on paper, a lot of things seemed really great about my life. I grew up upper middle class, white. My summers included things like piano lessons and Girl Scout camps and water fights in the park with my friends. I got really good grades, was in 7 or more extracurriculars. But something around the age of 14 started to feel deeply wrong. And by that, I mean, I couldn't see myself living for very long. And I had the privilege early on of accessing therapy and accessing medication at a pretty young age. And those things helped me a little bit. But even after 7 years of those things, I still couldn't see myself as belonging to the world. There's still this sense in my life that something was missing. And a lot, I think, of what was missing was how I was viewing myself as not belonging or not finding spaces where I did feel that. Things started to turn around for me when I was 18, 19 years old and started exploring rites of passage. And I found those spaces through a lot of serendipity, through a lot of pressing buttons and like following breadcrumbs and hearing this one thing someone mentioned, half as an aside in whatever youth conference I was in, and like following up with them and asking more questions. And at 19, I found myself on the mountainside, claiming womanhood and saying like, I'm a woman now. I'm letting my adolescence go. Like now I'm going to be a woman and a goddess at that, like kind of this big, powerful moment. And like immediately after that journey, I cut off all my hair, and then I like found myself staring at these non-binary people that I had met on the mountainside. And they were the first out non-binary people that I had met. And I was like learning they, them pronouns for the first time. And I just found myself very intrigued by them and noticing that they were inhabiting a queer masculinity that seemed to belong to them alone. And it felt a lot different than anything I'd ever encountered before. And I was realizing that a lot of how I defined masculinity was based on empire and abuse and destruction. And like for me, up until that point, masculinity was like everything that I wasn't, like everything that wanted to destroy queerness in the world. And seeing a different example of that embodied just started to break a lot of gender boxes in my head and catapulted me on this journey that was kind of slow going and like baby steps. Like then I joined a trans choir that was open to allies and was just like, scoping people out and hearing their stories, and started experimenting with different pronouns. Yeah. And like slowly, like kind of breadcrumb after breadcrumb, I started to see myself as belonging to the world and understanding myself as a body that needed to shapeshift and listen to this living myth in my body that was leading me down those paths and down that wisdom. And I think one of the most powerful moments for me, I mean, there were so many of them, but for a while, I identified with my diagnoses in harmful ways, in ways that felt like they were kind of entrapping me in that place. And on one of those journeys I took, I met a trans elder who would take my hand in his and he'd look me in the eye and he'd say, I see you, shapeshifter. I see you, edgewalker. I see that you need your underworld journeys. That is part of your gift,
Mm.
but you need to come back every time because your community needs you to. And it was the first time that I felt that I was being honored for the gifts and wisdom of my deep sadness, that it wasn't like something that was a problem or like disrupting or something to be fixed or cured or healed, but rather something that like I was bringing as a gift to the world. With the caveat that I couldn't stay down there. I couldn't stay in the underworld all seasons of the year. And that kind of mentality just felt a lot more life affirming for me and started to help me piece together, okay, what is my purpose and what's guiding me in this world. So fast forward to Yarrow Collective and learning about peer support. The kind of peer support we offer is rooted in what's sometimes called the psychiatric survivor or Mad Pride movement. It's a movement that has had many, many names. And when I learned about it, I remember feeling betrayed. Like, who had kept this history from me in all these years? Like, I had been looking for something like that all those years and then only learned about it a few years ago. And at least in this country, the origins of that movement come out of the 60s and 70s amongst folks who self-identified as ex-patients. And these were people who somehow survived, somehow got out of, lived through what at the time were called asylums, which nowadays most people will openly admit were not healthy places. They were very traumatizing places where folks were experiencing abuses of human rights. And these folks started to find each other, started to meet in living rooms and church basements, and started creating periodicals like the Madness Network News with the intention of like learning how to support one another when the systems that were supposed to support them were actually harming them. So yeah, I'm very passionate about this history because it's for me, it's like the social justice corner of the mental health world. It's like, what do our services look like when they're actually designed by people with lived experience who have been there or who are still there, and really seeks to address some of those oppressive underpinnings within our psychological institutions that still occur, even if we've improved since the asylum era. There's still human rights abuses that occur in our conventional systems. So taking a look at that and asking what are the alternatives. And I think one of the reasons I say that what I was getting healed from was some of that peer support mentality. Is like, for me, one of the most empowering things about peer support is this wisdom of lived experience and acknowledging each other as experts rather than having this hierarchy of like, I'm the provider, you're the patient or the client, which healing can still happen in that relationship, for sure. And just like troubling that dynamic and saying, okay, Natalie, like, you've been through a lot. What have you learned from what you've been through? And how are you making sense of your story now? Rather than prescribing how the provider is making sense of your story. Yeah, and I think at the heart of it, that's part of what that trans elder was doing for me, was helping me reframe how I was thinking about myself in ways that felt more true to me. So that's a long ramble. Thanks for listening.
I love the long ramble. I love it. Just so many. I've got pencil in hand and, just jotting down just, the places where like I want to, yes. And I think probably what bubbles up for me as almost a visual, if you will, is this relationship that you had with the trans elder. There's a generational, like ancestral coming forward, like you use the words breadcrumbs, like this kind of interweaving of the generations. In my own experience, my mom was diagnosed bipolar at 18, and when I was a young girl, I don't have specific memory. I have light specific memories around her being gone. But it wasn't until a couple of years ago where I was going through some items out at her house, and I came across this book that from my youth. And I used to open the library. I had a library in the living room, and you had to check out books from me, and you just played by my rules, just play along, right? And so I had this card still in the front of it. On the back side of it was my library card I had written with a pencil and lines and stuff, and you had to sign out and the date that it was due. I don't know what I would do to you if you didn't bring it back on time. But on the flip side of it was Southwest Mental Health Clinic. I thought, wow, that's kind of weird for me to be using that card as a young person, And so I called my mom and said, what is this? Where, like, can you fill in the gaps for me? And she said, oh, that's when I went away for a few weeks, I couldn't stop crying. And to me, I'm back there with this memory, and it's bubbled up for me out of nowhere, listening to you in your own experience, because it's the change making that has to be done to bring forward and move beyond things that have happened that are, gosh, I don't know where I want to go with this, except to say that the healing that needs to be done for generations back to bring forward healing in the now, and to be able to hold hands with someone and say, for everybody that walked before me, you belong. For all of those that didn't belong didn't feel like they belong, you do. I'm at my own rambling point here, but I'm touched by that, just a vision of there's folks that you are representing through your breadcrumb trail, to be able to say, I've pulled myself forward and up and out to create this space and to represent the concept of peer-to-peer and belonging so that others can learn from me. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody can be in that space and be okay with their voice being heard. So I guess I want to say thank you for coming through.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of, here in Larimer County, we've come a long way. I don't mean to get at all political, but just my own short knowledge of like our local landscape. It was once possible to get mental health help. You had to commit a crime, right? And at that point, in order to get support, you committed the crime, you were processed, and then you got sent to Greeley, or you got sent south to Denver, or even beyond to Colorado Springs, to Pueblo. And then maneuvering the chaos of like disjointed and dysfunctional processes, and a completely overwhelming, if you're in any kind of state of mind where you don't feel steady on your feet, what can be a totally overwhelming system, right? Of making appointments and making things work. I feel like we've made some progress, even on a local basis, to support people with like the behavioral health center with down Taft, at Taft and Trilby. The Yarrow Collective is one of several organizations. Are you finding that the awareness in our community is growing? Do you think we've made progress? Do you think there's what's your take on where we're at as a local community?
Yeah, I think we've made a lot of progress in the last few years. And I mean, part of this was, I don't know if you're familiar with the 2018 ballot measure.
Yep.
Um, I think it was called 1A. I should
Yep.
know this more exactly, but it was a ballot measure sent out to Larimer County voters to increase the sales tax by point oh something percent, like a pretty small
Tiny.
percentage.
Yep.
And that sales tax money is all going towards behavioral health services, so mental health, recovery-oriented services. And we buy a lot of stuff. It's a huge pile of money, like $20 million or something every year, maybe more than that. And part of that was to fund the Longview Behavioral Health facility being built, and part of that has been funding Yarrow Collective through the Impact Fund grants that they have every year. So I got into this nonprofit work around that time, like after that ballot measure had been passed. And I've just been living in Fort Collins the last 4 years, but even in like talking to friends I have in Boulder or in Denver, like I do have the sense that there's actually a lot more services here and different kinds of services too, because of that ballot measure. And I think it's something that we're kind of ahead as a community and like thinking of creative solutions for how to fund more mental health services. So that's pretty promising for me that we've done that. Ballot measure will be up again at some point in the next 15 years.
Yeah, I think so.
So, if you're still living here then, I'd encourage you to vote yes on it. But yeah, I feel like and the younger generation, I work with teens too, and working with youth is one of my passions. And my sense of this Gen Z and younger generation is that like they're struggling so much less with stigma. Like we don't really need to do destigmatizing campaigns amongst that generation. Maybe, I mean, I feel like you can always still do destigmatizing work. So as the stigma of like being able to say like, oh, I'm struggling out loud is being reduced, like I see us moving along in that capacity. But I'm still curious about like all the like having more diverse approaches, because I feel like I feel very fortunate that Yarrow Collective, like our first funding was from that impact grant, and feel very grateful for the folks who were like taking a chance on us and kind of taking a chance on this concept of peer support, which it's becoming a buzzword in the mental health worlds, but back then, like it was starting to get some buzz and hype around it, but there aren't a lot of examples of organizations like Yarrow Collective in the state of Colorado. So I still see a need for different ways of accessing services, because for some people, going to a behavioral health facility isn't going to work for them. And I definitely hear from a lot of BIPOC folks in the community that they need more culturally specific supports. And I see some of those starting to come in through organizations like La Familia, and the BIPOC Alliance, brings out a curanderismo, ancestral healing ceremony every month. And that's been like very popular ever since it started. So I still see a need for kind of more creative ways of approaching mental health besides some of those conventional systems. And especially in Yarrow's line of work, a lot of folks that we serve have chronic suicidality, or like they've tried a lot of resources. They maybe have been to mental hospitals half a dozen times before, and something still isn't working. And I think that's where I get most curious about our services and what's missing. and like who aren't they working for now, and what other creative things can we try? Um, because I don't believe one way is going to work for everyone. So
Mm-hmm.
having as many options as possible, so folks don't get stuck when they try this one thing and they're like, this is supposed to be helping, but it's not. And it's like, actually, you're not alone. Like this one thing doesn't help a lot of people, and then they have to go seeking.
Mm-hmm. To add to what I was saying earlier about my own like randomness of my mom and this library card, is that we are unwinding and like there's a conditioning and a programming and a stigma around what it means to be supported. And for so long, it was, institutional, medication, provider, diagnosis, you're broken, fill in the blank. And to now get to a place, these are some of the conversations I have with my teen, where these are human made, labels and processes that are coming under, are being questioned, and we're looking to support one another as humans and not pretend to know what's the best thing, and to be able to sit in a space, a safe space with a peer like yourself and say, I'm not sure what's wrong, here's how I'm feeling, and not have someone diagnose, but to the concept of sharing space, and to just witness is such a powerful experience, being on the receiving end of that and on the sharing, holding space for someone, end of that. So I think that, just as a side note, Lori Stolen is, I'm remembering, who gave me your name originally ages ago. And I helped her win that 1A. I was the communications manager on that campaign that we helped win that sales tax. So there's a big circle. Yeah, that was a big, just a aha that I just had when you're like one. I'm like, yeah, our mental health matters. Like what a fan. That's how I came into awareness around, yeah, just mental health in our community and the different audiences that it affects. So I want to take a moment, and there's a bit on your About Us page of the Yarrow Collective website that I found poetic. I know you're a writer, and that you have a way, and I'm likely there's a lot of your touch, and others touch through the entire, the way that you all present yourselves on Facebook and Instagram, and being as inclusive of you as you are. But I wanted to just share this with folks that are listening, and then just get your thoughts around it. Those of us who make up the Yarrow Collective have experienced psychiatric diagnosis, suicidality, trauma, extreme emotional distress, addiction, recovery, discrimination, and more. We are people who have found beauty in our sadness, who have found trapdoors at rock bottom, who have broken our hearts on the wind and found our names within, who have nightmares about mental hospitals, who sort of sometimes liked therapy and medication, who found community in rites of passage, who needed to define our stories in our own terms, who realized we were the experts of our own experience, who have trouble with linear timelines of healing, who sometimes are still really struggling, and who dream of alternatives. Some of us reject labels like mental illness, diagnosis, and recovery, while others of us identify with those words as useful and meaningful to our stories. The Yarrow Collective is born out of a need for alternatives, a need for community, and a need to reclaim our stories in ways that are meaningful to us. I appreciate that. It's an unusual feeling to feel seen and heard in between those lines. Like in between the lines is where we're all kind of sitting, right?
Yeah, that poem could be much longer, I feel. Like, yeah, I feel like every individual who comes to our groups or participates or facilitates with us could like add another line like about
Hmm.
like their uniqueness in this
Hmm.
story.
Hmm. Yeah. And two, the idea that, and I won't put words in your mouth, but there's, I think you can relate to this, that in my experience, in a healing crisis, um, where I have had my hand out and asking, seeking help, um, to be seen, to be heard, to just hold my hand. And through ceremony, through rites of passage, through spaces, um, finally getting to a place of perspective where I don't think my hand will ever not be out, because there's connection there that I'll never ever give up, but to finally have the wherewithal to turn around and extend my own hand and be sure that I know how to sit with you. Not how, but I'm safe to sit with.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were sharing that image, I'm just feeling like how the journey's never over. And like that line about troubling linear timelines of healing, I feel like right now where one of my teachers talks about this of like looking at like healed, healing, and healer, and how like we're all three of those things at the same time. And like we might be healed in some parts of us and like helping to heal, and then we're still actively healing in other parts, and it all like
Always.
it always threads together. And I feel like right now, one thing I'm doing, and I hope something Yarrow's doing too, I feel like I'm making those community connections, and I'm like, I'm still reaching this hand for support, and like still reaching this other hand to like receive and give support. And it's like I'm putting all these like foundations in place to weather the coming storms. And just like I feel really present, especially in our alternatives to suicide groups. Something we talk a lot about is like how useless like empty hope is. And like how
Mm,
many times people have told us like, oh, it's gonna get better, and it didn't get better. And just this sense, like I do have this optimism now. I'm like, my best days are yet to come. And then it's like coupled with this like, and I think our worst days are yet to come too. Like it's
mhm,
been a really wild ride. Like
mhm,
4 years
mhm,
ago, everything going on with COVID, like just the amount of things that we're contending with globally, I think is only going to increase in my lifetime. And the climate crisis and just all layers of things that are coming like surging up to be reckoned with. And yeah, I think part of what it feels like we're building in those alternatives to suicide rooms is like how do we live like sit with that awareness and like with that reality, and sometimes a feeling of hopelessness, but like still believe in the beauty of the
mhm,
connections that we have, and still believe in the profoundness of the connection that we can build,
mhm,
that we cultivate like over and over and over again, that will still make life worth living. And yeah, I just even in my personal life and journeying, like that feels a lot of what I'm building right now. It's like I'm
mhm,
killing the garden so that
mhm.
like it'll feed me, like
Yeah,
which is the fan.
yeah. There's not this, it's not going to be all okay. It's also not all going to just disintegrate. That there is a place where, as humans, we can continue to seek, uh, authentic joy and to experience the beauty of, like, where did the snow go? The beauty of this beautiful spring day, and that amidst, crazy town, that there is beauty, and that we can do it together. We have to do it together. I think that the nurture, the balancing, that's happening in our world, is going to take some. It's going to create some waves that we've never experienced before, and depending on, our community, is going to be something that we. Interestingly, how isolating COVID felt, while at the same time creating this sense of community, that we do need each other pretty desperately. I have to say that I instantly feel a belonging with you. I have to say that I know somehow that I'm safe amongst the humans who make up Yarrow Collective. And if others that are feeling similarly want to reach out, how do they find you? How do they connect?
We have a website, yarrowcollective.org. So that's one way to just read more about everything going on. And there's like a calendar on there, so you can see all the different types of groups that we have happening. They all have a slightly different vibe, and they all have a slightly different culture, kind of co-created with the regulars who create that space with us. And they also have different themes. So I've mentioned alternatives to suicide. We have that group both online and in person for folks with lived experience of suicidal thoughts or actions, whether those are in the past or the present. Folks are welcome there. We've got a teen group. We have 2 different BIPOC only spaces for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, chronic illness and disability group. Some harm reduction groups where some folks in that space are in recovery, some folks are still actively using, but talking about their relationship to substance use. And a hearing voices group for folks who hear voices or have unusual beliefs. I think I named them all. It's quite a few nowadays. And a peer support for peer supporters group. So if anyone is working or volunteering in peer support roles, a space to talk about that in our practice together. So website, yarrowcollective.org. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at Yarrow Collective Colorado, where we'll post about our groups. The in-person ones are mostly in Fort Collins. We'll have some Loveland events in the coming year. And there's a few different groups that are also offered online.
And you all are supported through grants from the county and then individual donations as well, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, our website kind of lists out the different grant funders that we have, and has a link to donate if folks want to support our work in that way.
Yeah. And the people that make up the team that is Yarrow Collective are all, as I read through the different bios, just incredible humans with their own lived experience coming forth and able to, I can just see by the words on just the screen, that able to connect with others of all ages, on a very real level. There doesn't seem to be a barrier to access of any degree. Come one, come all. It feels very open to that. So any last thoughts or things that have bubbled up for you in visiting today?
Yeah, I'm thinking of this poem that inspires me and has inspired some of how I think of my work at the Yarrow Collective and how I think of my own journey with mental health that I'd love to read to close us out today.
I would love that.
Called Revelation Must Be Terrible by David Whyte. Revelation must be terrible, with no time left to say goodbye. Imagine that moment, staring at the still waters, with only the brief tremor of your body to say, you are leaving everything and everyone you know behind. Being far from home is hard, but at least we are exiled together. When you open your eyes to the world, you are on your own for the first time. No one is even interested in saving you now. And the world steps in to test the calm fluidity of your body from moment to moment, as if it believed you could join its vibrant dance of fire and calmness and final stillness, as if you were meant to be exactly where you are, as if, like the dark branch of a desert river, you could flow on without a speck of guilt, and everything everywhere would still be just as it should be. As if your place in the world mattered, and the world could neither speak nor hear the fullness of its own bitter and beautiful cry without the deep well of your body resounding in the echo. Knowing that it takes only that one terrible word to make the circle complete. Revelation must be terrible, knowing you can never hide your voice again. And that's Revelation Must Be Terrible by David Whyte.
That's incredible. Thank you.
Thank you for feeling out loud with me.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, yeah, thank you. And I will say at this point, thank you folks for listening in. Thank you for choosing to think out loud with me and my guest, Silen Wellington, today. Until we visit again, go live with intention. And please, please, please don't let anybody fuck with your flow. Big love, big hugs. Bye, friends.